Hello, everybody. My name is Jessica Lord, like Jan said. I work at GitHub. I live in Oakland, which is the better half of the Bay Area, if you know anything. Yeah. GitHub is in the other half, San Francisco, but that's okay. And I'm going to talk about Git-it, which is a thing I built to try and teach people Git and GitHub. And I'm going to break it into these categories. First is like why I started trying to build this. The second is all the stuff I had to do to make it work. And then the third is how we use it at GitHub to inform some of the stuff I do as a part of new user research and making GitHub better for new people. So why did Git-it happen? In the fall of last year, a thread started internally at GitHub about hosting a community event, sort of hack night, where we could just have people over and help new people learn Git and GitHub, because we realize Git and GitHub is not super straightforward. I don't know if you know. Some things are like pull requests. What is that? I don't know. But we wanted people to be able to come and in person make their first pull requests, leave having that confidence that they've already done it, not having to like figure it out in the wild on their own and get green contribution squares and feel like they're a part of something. And I love that, and I was already kind of cooking up ideas in my head of wanting to do something similar, so I immediately jumped on board to lead the project, and I haven't been doing this that long, so I really remember learning all of this myself, and so I'm really passionate about, while this stuff is fresh in my head, trying to tell other people, and so I can explain it how it made sense to me, because very quickly, you start to accept things, right? Like, I know I already accept branching as just like a thing. I get it, and I forget what it's like to be someone who doesn't understand what branching is. So, earlier in that year, I had been at NodeConf, which is a Node conference in the United States, in the woods, if you want to come. There's one this year. It's awesome. And started talks. All the sessions were workshops on a topic, so everybody was hands-on building something the whole conference, and Substack, James Halliday, who is here, and Max Ogden, who is here, they ran a workshop on node streams, and Substack built Stream Adventure, which was a little terminal app that walked you through lessons of node streams. And it was awesome, and a lot of people really liked learning that way, and so Rod Vag took that and made the framework for creating these little terminal apps, and it's called Workshopper. And so then people started building other ones, and the idea of this NodeSchool came together. And so this is what one of the apps looks like. This is the Learn You Node app, and it puts a menu up in your terminal, and you can work through the steps, and there are different colors for different ones. This is a few of them. There are a whole lot more, but if you go to nodeschool.io, there's a website now that has links to all the different workshops, and then people have started hosting in-person meetups to do these workshops. And so some of them have been purely for just doing the NodeSchool workshops. Some of them were existing like JS or Node meetups in that city that they dedicated a specific night to just doing the Node workshops. And they're self-driven and they work offline, so you don't have to do them with people, but you can. It's nice because then you can ask people questions when you get hung up. So people come to mentor, and then people come to learn, and so I've done a few of these, and I loved that, and I also really like writing Node, but I work at GitHub, and there's a lot of Ruby. It's totally Ruby on Rails, everything. So I secretly try to find ways that I can write Node as a part of my job. And so I said, I'm going to build a workshopper for teaching people Git and GitHub, and that's what I'm going to have people do during this hack night that we have at GitHub. So I set out to build it, and building it, the first step was thinking about teaching Git. Whoa, oh, okay, that's the real slide. I think it's showing hidden slides. Anyways, so there are Git emulators out there. I don't know if you've ever tried any of those, but like a Git emulator is essentially you go to a website and it has like a little faux terminal, and you can type terminal commands and it acts like terminal and that kind of stuff, which is neat and nice, but to me, I see drawbacks as, for a developer, you have to re-implement Git and terminal in the browser, and it only works when people are online on that website, and that's a ton of work. And then for the person doing it, you go through the whole lesson, right? And then when you finish, you still need to install Git, you still need a GitHub account, you still need to make your first pull request in the wild. And so you still have this big hurdle ahead of you, and I think that's a bummer. And so what's extra awesome about these terminal workshops is like, they're already in the terminal. So we're already halfway there. People are already going to get eased into terminal, and it just becomes really easy to use real Git, real GitHub, and then a non-real human, but a real robot, which I'll talk about later. And then you get your real green contribution squares because you're really doing it. And I wanted to teach the kind of GitHub flow to put together the way that you will work with GitHub once you start becoming active. So the first thing you do, these are the lessons in Git-it, right? So the first thing you do is you get Git, install and set up your Git. Then you create a repository locally. You make a commit to it. Then you get your GitHub account. And then you set up your remotes so that you can push your local repository to GitHub, right? That's like the first local to remote. But then GitHub's all about social and working with other people and working with existing projects. So then the next step is to fork a project and clone it locally. Then you need to create a branch for your feature. Then you need to get a collaborator to work with. Then you need to pull in your collaborator's changes. Then you got to make pull requests. Then you have to celebrate when your pull request gets merged. But to do this, the first thing I had to do was fork the Workshopper framework. So this is, let's see if this runs. How they work. When you just, it's a command line module. You type Git-it, it loads the menu. You select which lesson you want to do, and then when you're done with your lesson, you run verify at the end, and then it tells you if you passed or not. It's green, so I have Git installed. But typically, the way Workshopper is set up is it's expecting people to be writing JavaScript, right? So it's comparing a JavaScript file that the user makes to the expected output. But this is Git, so no one's writing JavaScript. And that was another important thing. Like, I wanted this to be language free, so I don't care what language you're coming from or what language you intend to use. And I don't care if you know a language at all right now. So like Git-it doesn't require coding. You just need to type letters. So there is no JavaScript file anyone's creating that I can compare to. So I forked Workshopper basically to turn off a bunch of stuff so that I could just run Node in the background. So when people are using Git, when they're typing Git-it verify, the verify command, it's either running Git in the background, hitting the GitHub API, or hitting my server that's then doing other things. Which means I had this toolbox, whereas the normal Node Workshopper modules have just the Workshopper module. But then I had to build kind of like 3 other projects to do this. But it was fine, because I learned a ton. So you have the repo that people fork, the GitHub API, which I use a lot, and then a server. But the only thing the users interact with is the Git-it terminal app, and then the Patchwork repo that they fork. And that's, which is on GitHub. And so those are the 2 things that the user sees. But on the back side, sometimes Git-it is talking to the GitHub API. Sometimes it's talking to my server, which is talking to the GitHub API. And then the GitHub API is changing a person's fork or changing the original repo. So when someone is doing the very first challenge, which verifies if you have Git installed or not, so instead of like comparing 2 JavaScript files, what I'm doing is actually using a child process to run Git in the background. So you can see like I'm literally running Git version, but no one can see that. But that's what's happening in the background. And so I'm getting the same thing that you would get if you typed Git version, and I'm comparing that output with the expected output, right? So if you have Git installed, I can assume the output's going to contain the words Git version. And so I do different things like that to verify that the person's done what they needed to do to complete that challenge. Then there's a useful made-up thing. If you've set up your Git config, right, you have your name and you have your email address, there's nothing stopping you from setting all kinds of configuration. The first two are really common, but you could do a ton. You could do like git user.favorite color blue. But so I have people do user.username and then write in their GitHub username, because as I'm checking things against the GitHub API, I need to know what they made their GitHub username. And so this is kind of the best way to do that, because then it's set and it's always there. So when I'm running Git in the background, I can run git config username, which outputs their username, which I can then send in a query string to the API. Speaking of the GitHub API, so in one place, Git-it goes directly to the GitHub API, and that's to verify that they set up a GitHub account, which is one of the challenges. And so I just use the node module request, and I make a request, and I verify that that account exists. Simple, but it just happens directly in Git-it in terminal in the background. But then people need something to fork. So I created a repo for people to fork, and I wanted it to not be totally sucky. So it's a GitHub Pages hosted website. If you have not exploited GitHub Pages, please exploit GitHub Pages. GitHub will host anything for free that you put on a GH Pages branch, so put stuff on there. But so it's a website hosted on GitHub Pages, and that's the repo branch. So it only exists to just be a website that GitHub is hosting for free. And what it is a list of everyone who's completed the workshop. So they're doing the workshop to add their name to the list of people who've completed the workshop, right? Like that's what their pull request is going to be. And so to do all of the rest of the things, I needed a server, which is Repo Robot, which is a cat from space. He also has a GitHub account. If he had more followers, I think he would be like pretty active. He'd be on that list of most active GitHub users. But he's a cat from space. He's a GitHub account. He's also a Node server, which lives on a DigitalOcean droplet, which are only $5 and really easy. I Git deploy everything with Taco, which is a thing that Max Ogden wrote for Git deploying super simple, like straightforward Node apps. And then I talk to the GitHub API with GitHub. The repo is GitHub, but the Node module is GitHub-API. But it's by Michael. I can't pronounce his last name, but they use it in pros.io, which also, if you haven't checked out pros.io, it's a really cool, different UI for looking at your GitHub repos. I can't use it because I have access to everyone's GitHub repos, and I can't give that access to pros, but you should try it. It's really beautiful. So the very first challenge where Repo Robot and the server come into play are challenge number 8, when you have to add Repo Robot as a collaborator on your fork. GitHub does not have any hooks for when you get added as a collaborator. The only thing we do is send you an email saying that someone added you as a collaborator. So Repo Robot's GitHub account email is a CloudMailin address. And CloudMailin lets me attach a webhook to an email, and it will send JSON to a server, right? So when someone adds Repo Robot as a collaborator, an email goes to CloudMailin, and they send that email as a JSON to Repo Robot server. And then when the user is validating or verifying that they completed that challenge, and they run Git-it verify to say, like, yes, I added Repo Robot as a collaborator, I'm grabbing their username again, and Git-it is sending a request to the server, and then my server, Repo Robot, is checking to see if Repo Robot has push permission to that person's fork, because I know the repo name, it's Patchwork, and I know their username because I can run Git and get their username. But meanwhile, as soon as the server gets that email from CloudMailin that Repo Robot was added as a collaborator, RepoRobot knows that he has write access to this person's fork, so he goes and writes on it. So during their an earlier challenge where they have to create a branch and then a file, they just type their username, and then RepoRobot is also an artist, as you can see, and he goes in there and he deletes their name and writes it in ASCII. So then the user is forced to pull in changes so that they're up to date with their collaborator and that everything matches the remote. Then in the challenge number 10, they have to make their pull request to the original Patchwork repo. And to verify that they did that, Git-it sends a request to the server with the person's username. And then I can check. The server goes through the open pull requests on the Patchwork repo and sees if any have come from that user, and then sends back true or false to say, like, did that person complete that challenge? But then on the original repo, Patchwork, there's a webhook. So every time a pull request comes in to Patchwork, it sends it to the RepoRobot server saying, order in, like someone's done a pull request because now you need to do some more work. So RepoRobot looks at each pull request. He checks the file name and the file content to verify they're as expected. If they're not, he writes a comment on the repo saying, like, the file name was wrong, or where's the ASCII art? And if it's all okay, he merges the pull request. Then, if he merges the pull request, that means the person's completed their challenge, right? They need to be on that page. So RepoRobot acts like a name and ASCII art of all the people that have completed the workshop. And then he rebuilds the site and puts the person who just finished on top. And it actually jiggles because of CSS. But so right now there are like 234 people who have done it. So Node is awesome for this, and so is the GitHub API, because if we just think about what the RepoRobot server is doing, like, it's got 3 kinds of requests that can be coming in at any time, from the email, from checking collaboration and checking if someone submitted a PR. But then it's sending a bunch of requests out to the GitHub API to write ASCII art, to check if permissions exist, check if a pull request exists, writing comments on pull requests, merging pull requests, and rebuilding Patchwork. So all of this is happening, and it's able to happen at the same time and be fine because of Node, and that's how Node is beautiful and just works for these kind of things. Testing is kind of crazy. I only have a test for the merging of pull request parts, because actually you can't. RepoRobot and Node servers can do things at the same time, but you can't do things at the same time with GitHub, so I actually have to, like, phase out my merging pull requests to GitHub, because I can't merge 2 at the same time, because GitHub can't handle that. So RepoRobot can merge them at the same time, but then he, like, slowly hands them back to GitHub. But to test that and try and break that, I have to use test accounts on GitHub, and a script that basically goes and creates a branch on my test account, creates a file. It adds the ASCII art itself instead of going through the RepoRobot stuff. Then it creates a pull request and tries to crash RepoRobot from trying to. I try to send him like 4 pull requests at the same time and try to crash it and that kind of stuff. And then it has to go and delete all of them and then repeat it. And it's all real GitHub, so it's all really happening and making green squares everywhere, and it's kind of a little crazy. It also means RepoRobot needs to be a collaborator on the Patchwork fork on each of my test accounts, but that's how it is. So now, sharing Git-it. So when I talked about earlier how we wanted to have this night at GitHub, that became Patchwork Night, which is a night we host in the office now. And people in the area come out to mentor, but also GitHubbers hang around. And like, shout out to Mark Otto, who wrote Bootstrap, but will also come and teach you about branches at the office. And so people come and they work through all the Git-it challenges, and we put on the monitor, we put the website that everyone is working towards getting their name on. We just put it on auto refresh like every 10 seconds, and so every time someone finishes it, it like jiggles the new name, and we can all high five and stuff. And then as soon as someone finishes it, you make them a mentor to go and help other people, because now they know. And then everyone leaves, and they've got green squares on their account, and they've made a pull request in the real world, and they've met other cool people, and it's super fun. And it also directly ties into the work that I do at GitHub. I'm a part of the new user experience team, which I like to say over trying to pronounce that acronym. But we are designers, developers, and user researchers who are trying to make GitHub better for new users, because I think GitHub's really benefited from the fact that developers joined GitHub. So they knew about version control, they knew about Git, and so developers are there. And also a lot of our new signups are from people who aren't yet developers or who haven't used Git. And there's not a lot on GitHub right now to teach you what a pull request is and what a fork means, right? And we realize that, and we realize that's a huge barrier for people. And so that's what my team does, is to make GitHub.com a better place for new users. And so doing Patchwork events and getting FaceTime with new users leads directly into the stuff we build into GitHub.com. And knowing that people like interacting with a robot will lead exactly into stuff that we build into GitHub.com. To be totally new on GitHub. So if you want to delete everything and come back, it'll be really cool. Yeah. Then we're going to spread it so that other GitHubbers, because we are like 70% distributed, so we have GitHubbers everywhere, and we want GitHubbers to host this where they are. And so the next one is going to be in London, and it's going to be the first non-GitHub HQ one. And then I want to build the next level, and it's pretty awesome that as soon as people have finished Git-it, they're like, what's next? What's the next thing? And I've heard of merge conflicts, and I want that. And I'm like, no, you're successful if you never have that. But it also gets the gears in my head going, because I'm like, how can I manufacture merge conflicts? Like, that sounds kind of interesting. So I'm going to build a next level Git-it to manufacture merge conflicts for people. So yeah, if you want to host a NodeSchool event, so Git-it is on the NodeSchool page as one of the NodeSchool modules. And you should totally host an event. You need a place with Wi-Fi and tables and people. Or you can mentor an event. If you go to nodeschool.io/events, you can see all the upcoming events. Max Ogden and I are going to do a Norwegian NodeSchool tour after this conference. You can also build a workshop. If you don't build Git servers and stuff like that, it's way easier. So fork or use Workshopper and build a workshop and teach things that you know. And watch the GitHub blog for new cool user stuff. The end.
Good job. I love how everyone is doing the choreography I trained them earlier. Great talk. So I got to apologize. I said she's going to teach Node using Node. She's going to teach Git using Node. How could I confuse that? I'm very sorry. You picked it up really quickly. Shout out to Peter Miller, who's keeping asking the right questions. So you're dropping people into the command line to use Git. How scary is that for people? Because the command line itself is already very scary.
Right. I think it is really scary, but I think what's nice about Git-it is that it's also teaching you command line. So built into the challenges and the text you get on each challenge, it also explains to you like how to CD into something, you know, and what that means, and how to list into a directory. So you're actually getting command line knowledge too. It does not assume that you know command line when you start. And it is scary, but I think a lot of people think it's scary, but they want to learn, you know? And so I think so far it's been good, and I've been surprised at how quickly people have been able to do it. And you're not going to ruin anything if you mess up the command line. So, well, okay, I mean, with the stuff that you're using in Git-it, right? Like, if you are sitting there trying to think of, like, what word sounds dangerous that I can start plugging into this, like, yes. But if you're following along with some of the stuff, like, you won't mess up that much.
All right. What's the worst state that you have found a user in or a learner in?
I mean, nothing's been totally bad or irreversible, and it's been really good because when people mess up, it helps me know what I need to explain better, because it is kind of tricky to explain to somebody, like, create a folder directory, like, make dir of all of the projects that you expect to do in your coding life, and then make one named this, and then go into that one, so, like, people have been Git-initting like their entire computer, and so there's, I mean, so nothing terrible has happened, but the things like that have happened, or people have been not using forks the right way and actually doing stuff on my fork or my original repo instead of their fork. So nothing's been irreversible or super bad, but it all leads to sort of helping me know how to explain this stuff better.
All right. Really hard to pronounce. Repo Robot. Again, can it help detect when people get stuck, and is there other ways to get them engaged again if they drop out of the program?
Right now, not really, but in the future, yes. And in the future of GitHub.com, yes.
I see. So this is actually going to be something that's going to be rolled into the proper GitHub experience. Yeah.
So we already have a robot at GitHub. His name is Hubot. So Repo Robot's mine, but Hubot is GitHub's. But what's nice about this is kind of I can build this in a lot quicker amount of time than we can roll stuff into .com. So we get to test ideas and concepts this way, and then pick the parts that work really well and build them into .com, and make it a little different, because we also don't prescribe to use Git and GitHub you must be fluent on the command line. We try to build a lot of stuff into GitHub.com so that you don't have to use command line, and there is a lot of stuff you can do. You can totally do the whole GitHub flow almost straight on .com. So we're gonna work with that and build.
Renaming files. Give me renaming files, please. Anyway, sorry. So who is gonna send all their friends who still have to learn Git to that? And who's gonna run one of those in-person meetups here in Oslo? You should start one. Excellent. You have, or wherever you if you're here. Okay. Remember them. Remember him.
Okay.
All right. Cool. Excellent. Is there anything you want to add that you didn't have a chance to talk about?
No.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much, Jessica.